Greetings, everyone! Your cartoonist pal Stan here with another episode of 50 Years in the Dungeon. I should say another episode. This is episode 1 of season 2 of 50 Years in the Dungeon. Um, the show started last year for me to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the game D&D and the hobby of tabletop role-playing games. But I've been having so much fun that I've decided to keep going. And you know what? I pondered whether or not I should change the title because I picked that title specifically because last year was the 50th anniversary. But I thought about it and I realized that, you know what? My journey with the game is about 50 years. It's kind of a cool title. I've done a logo and everything that I like. So I'm just going to keep using that title even though we're spreading out the discussion now. And I'm going to have to work on this intro because I had a little patter I did every time. Need a new patter. But beyond that, it's going to be more the same. And so I decided I wanted to do something a little different here for the first episode in the second season. And a couple of people have asked me when I would be a guest. Because, I'm in every show, but I'm asking the questions. I get to tell a lot of the stories I want to tell anyway. But people have specifically asked to hear my stories, and I thought, well, if there's a time to do that, it's in this kind of liminal space of the switchover. And so that's what we're going to do this week. But since I can't ask the questions to myself, I asked one of my previous guests to come back and take the host seat while I take the guest seat. Hello, Michael Pastor. Hello, Dale. And hello, Michelle Vukovic. Glad you're all here to join me for this fun special episode where the pressure's a little off me. I don't know. Anyway, the person I asked and who I'm very happy said yes was a guest here on episode 15, I think, which is quite a while ago. But he's decided to come back and take the host seat and point some. I don't know. He says he's come up with some questions. He's ready for me. So I don't know how nervous I should be, but he's a pretty good guy. His reputation's kind of tough, but I think he's a softie. I'm going to bring him in here now, and I think I just signed my own death warrant, but that's all right because our guest host is James Lowder. Thank you, Jim, for agreeing to do this.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I get to play Stan this time, which is I get to be the even nicer guy without the reputation of being the giant pain in the neck. So it'll be new for me too.
Well, I mean, you've done a lot of different things. We talked about when you were on, you've done a lot of work with authors and game designers and a lot of I know a lot of conventions I've seen where you are the host on panels.
Right.
And one of the reasons why I chose to ask you is I've always thought you lead really good panels. You ask good questions. You've got a good knack for listening to people and using that to pose a question and build a story out of someone else's story.
Well, that's kind of what editors are supposed to do, right? I mean, you're the ideal audience, and you're supposed to be able to lead things in that direction. So, um, somebody asked if I'm drawing a picture. Good God, no. That would be a horrible, horrible mistake. So, um,
I should have thought of that.
oh, yeah, not pretty at all. I tried. When I was in high school, I drew comics and stuff, comic book stuff, but they're all pretty miserable. So, uh,
Well, I mean, one of the things that one of the secrets behind why it works for this show is because I'm drawing something someone else has drawn. I don't have to think about it. I'm doing an interpretation, and I'm doing the sketch even. I'm not even doing the finished
yeah.
bit. So it allows me to continue to put most of my brain into listening and speaking. Whereas if you watch
Well,
my Thursday show where I'm doing improv cartooning, there are points where I just can't put three words together because I'm trying to do something new.
Right. Well, but I mean, it's not like translating, Brahms stuff into Stan stuff is an easy translation either. But you've internalized a
Yeah.
lot of
Well,
those
but
moves.
it's a natural translation. Like the filter is in my eyes; it's not in
Right.
my
Exactly.
hand.
Yep. Yep. Um, so we'll use the same basic structure for this as you used in season one.
Sure.
So the first question is always going to be, how did you get involved in gaming? How did gaming get into your life?
Yeah. So we, like a lot of families, we had a lot of board games around, and I even before I got into, I didn't play war games like other folks did, but I did like board games, and I liked board games based about sports. And I remember
Which games?
uh,
Was it like Stratomatic or
well, not
those kind of
yeah,
games?
I wasn't deeply enough to do Stratomatic, but like simple versions, like a card game that simulated baseball, or we had a very old mechanical game that my dad had when he was a kid. Um, uh, that was had little what do you call them? Just a little metal balls and a an arm that would pitch them, and you had a
And you
bat
had the
on
wooden
the screen.
bat, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
I love that. And I also uh, played tennis competitively as a youth,
Wow.
and so I made a in the mid 70s. There's a thing called World Team Tennis, which came along, and I made a World Team Tennis board/card game. Uh, that's the first game I ever designed that
Right.
I can remember. It was terrible. Like even at the time, I put it together. It worked mechanically, but it was no fun, and very quickly, even I didn't want to play it anymore. But I
Well,
do remember
yeah,
putting that together.
but that's the pathway. I mean, that's a really common part of the story for people who become game designers,
Right.
that they take some game that they like, and I can do something different with this. I don't have to. I can color outside the lines and do something else with it. It's Gary and Dave looking at tactics and saying this is horribly broken and we can actually do better, and then starting off from there.
Yeah, I think the knack that the people who end up successfully moving beyond that to make more games is, or one of them is that we make this game and we immediately see it doesn't work. Whereas everyone else, like my brother and sister, is like, "Whoa, you made a game and it worked, right?
Right.
I don't want to play it with you, but it worked."
Right.
Nope, it's mm.
Nope, I can do better than this. So you were, when you were in this playing in the 70s, then with the board games, I mean, it was that more like the 3M bookcase games and Twixt and things like
Yeah,
that,
like
or was it?
there's like Parker Brothers and
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
Clue and Scrabble. I was a big Scrabble player.
The
Um,
mass market classic stuff.
uh,
Okay.
and my my mom's family is from Canada, and so when and this actually comes in a little later, just a few years later, but uh, Trivial Pursuit uh, got published there before it got published here, and so we played it. Like I got to see and play Trivial Pursuit before it hit in America, but it was very Canadian oriented, so I wasn't very good at it.
A lot of questions about hockey.
Yeah,
Uh,
history, Canadian history.
yeah.
So there was that, but so D&D, like
So
so many
what was the first
people.
hobby?
Hmm?
What was the first hobby game you got into?
Uh, it's got to be D&D, right? I mean,
Okay.
I didn't know what a hobby game was. I didn't, like I say, because I didn't do war games or miniatures games. uh, I didn't have anyone to introduce me to that, and I didn't shop uh, in a store where I could be introduced to that. So roundabout, I've heard this so many times in the last 50 weeks. Round about
Right.
the time that Lord of the Rings, the Hobbit came on TV, which got me to read Tolkien, and then the Lord of the Rings Bakshi came out, and I was getting into that, and then because of that, someone told me about this thing D&D they'd heard about, and
Okay.
uh, I got to, so that would be somewhere in the 78, late 77, 78 era. Uh, and I got to play it, and I liked it a lot. But it was, um, it was sold out. I couldn't find copies of it. And
Oh
so,
wow.
uh, not even, yeah, the box set, the Holmes box set was available at that point. I certainly couldn't, I couldn't find the white box, but I couldn't find anything. And in fact, the only thing I could find was the coloring album.
Very
This was
nice.
the
Yep.
first D&D product I ever bought or played, and I say played because in the center of this is a D&D esque board game, right? So the text is by Gygax, and
Right.
and describes what a D&D adventure is like, and the game is a little, it's like a proto dungeon board game. It's super easy, but it's that kind of thing, and so that really solidified in my head. I understand what D&D is, and so the next holiday season, again, I come from I come from a mixed in so many ways family. We, my, my mom's side is I don't even know what uh, kind of Christian, because they also are kind of split between them. Different members of the family went
Okay.
different ways. But my dad's side is Jewish, and I was raised mostly Jewish. But we got Christmas presents and Hanukkah presents. So somewhere in that next holiday season, I got the Holmes box set with the blue book, and that was it. That was it.
It's kind of that's unusual because a lot of people got introduced through other play groups. You know, somebody played and invited them in. Not I've heard of this game and I'm going to go out and
Yeah.
find it by myself.
Well, like I say, I
That's
did get to
actually
play
pretty unusual.
one time. I think it was at a summer camp. I got to play one session,
Okay,
and then
there you go.
in fact, I couldn't find people to play with at home, even after I had the game. So it was the next summer at camp when we had a campaign that was my first real dive into playing.
Did you play or did you run?
I played. Um,
Okay. How long before you were actually running games for people?
um, well, I mean, I tried to run with the Holmes box because well, first I tried to make my younger brother run for me, and that didn't work so well. And then I tried to run, but I couldn't find anyone who was really interested in playing, so I kind of ran for myself, and that
Yep.
didn't work so great. I did, however, start. Uh, I made up a little campaign setting. I did a couple of dungeons that I designed, and
And see, that was my next
yeah,
question. Was yeah, was it prepackaged stuff or was it your own?
yeah.
And
And the thing that I feel really, even looking back, I feel really proud about is my dungeons were all kind of had a narrative in them. Like they weren't just kind of you go from here to there. It was you. There's a thing that happens in room one which will point you to another part of the story in room 12. And then if you go up to the tower, you have to do that thing so that you can then go back down. And like it seemed natural to me at the time, but when I look back at what everyone else was doing at the time, I realized I was kind of I was kind of a little ahead of the curve.
That's I was gonna yeah, that's unusual because mostly it was draw the map, fill it in with stuff that doesn't necessarily make sense. And this was even the published stuff
Yeah,
that, sort of what's the wandering Asmodeus doing here? We randomly roll that. Were you doing comics on your own and doing? Were you thinking about doing fiction as well, or was
uh,
this?
yes, yes, in both. I was
So
doing.
that makes sense, right?
Um, I still have the map and one illustration I did for my campaign setting that never got used anywhere.
Right,
Um, and I was writing fiction, but not associated with that.
right,
Yeah,
right.
but yeah,
But the impulse to make this a narrative
yeah,
game, because that's the underpinning for all of it, as has come to the fore now over time. Was kind of always there. And so if you were doing those other things, that's kind of explains why it appealed to you too, right?
yeah,
Here's a different platform to tell stories, and you're already doing fiction, already doing comics, so that makes sense.
indeed,
Um, what was your first gaming? So you had trouble getting a gaming group together. What
yeah.
was your first regular gaming group like?
So, aside from the summer, so summer camp was regular. Like we played every day for 8 weeks,
Right.
and that was it. And when I went away to college, uh, I was very excited about the opportunity to find because I knew I'd heard that Dungeons and Dragons was catching on at colleges and that there would probably be a group somewhere I could join. And
So this
my
is early
this is
80s.
1982.
Yep.
Uh, and my mother made me promise I wouldn't go into a sewer.
Right.
So
Yes.
you
That
can do
that
that,
was
but
those
promise you
stories
won't go into a sewer.
were still lingering. Um,
Oh, they were just launching.
yeah.
uh, and the the interesting thing is, I got there and there was a D&D group. There's a little notice in the campus paper. I think they met on Saturdays or Sundays in the University Union, and I went down, and it turned out that that group was mostly run by locals. I went to State University of New York at Binghamton, which is
Binghamton.
now
Right. Yeah.
Binghamton University.
Yep.
And So it's a big campus. Lot of people coming in not from in town. These groups were run by people who were locals, and one or two of them took a few classes on campus so that they could have this club, so they'd have somewhere to have their D&D games.
That's
And
amazing. Right.
they really weren't all that interested in having new kids from Long Island show up and ruin their games. So uh, basically, you could come in and join, but you joined with a first level character, and they were all mid level characters, and it was terrible. So I went once or twice, and I'm like, this this sucks. I don't need to do this anymore.
Right.
Um, and the other thing that I was really passionate about, the other super nerdy thing I was really passionate about were comic books,
Right.
and so I was kind of focusing on that. And there were some D&D players in the comics group, but uh, no one was inviting me to their game. But there were issues of Dragon magazine floating around, and in Dragon magazine there was an ad for Villains and Vigilantes, which
Right.
was a superhero, and we were our connectivity was Marvel, the Marvel comics and Marvel stories, X Men
Yep.
and Avengers at the time,
Yep.
and we thought superhero and role playing, and so that became my big first campaign. We started a thing which ran 8 years. We had four DMs that would trade off, uh, and we had a shared narrative that ran through the whole thing, and we played V&V. And I always say that
Did you have a super team then, and when one person switched out as GM, their character was out of the story, and
Yes, yes. And we all had we wound up having multiple characters, and some left, and some came back and changed their identities. I mean, it was well and truly deep into comic book storytelling stuff.
fantastic. That was V&V was our superhero game of choice
Yeah,
too. We played V&V through high school, and then I started playing into college too.
yeah.
So yep, yep,
And it also was because of the kind of game it was. Right, D&D is a big honking book with lots of rules, and everyone had house rules, but you didn't really dive too deep in it. V&V was only as long as the Holmes book, and very amenable to tweaks and new rules. And I'd say that was my game design uh, undergraduate course. I went to college and I got a degree in villains and vigilantes. Right? I
sure.
I learned, we tweaked the rules that were there. We made up whole new sets of rules, play tested them. When it didn't work, we'd meet and talk about it and try it again and agree that, when we
Yep.
found it worked, okay, that's how it works from now on. And
Because yeah, and V&V is a great game to do that with, because the
yeah,
parts of the game that work really well, like the opposed powers charts,
yeah,
are really cool, and those work really well. And then if I have to multiply more fractions to get my hit points, with
yeah,
this, and so for people who haven't played it, it's got things that it does brilliantly, and then parts of it that are super wonky.
right.
But it also, for the comics fan, it had the Willingham art
Uh,
and the Jeff D stuff, and
yep.
Jack Herman's writing, and it was
Well,
very narrative based. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, I love those. So, yep, I totally get
yeah.
the appeal.
When someone would have a character, you would find there would when you'd come across a rule that didn't make any sense, everyone was invested in, well, what if we change it this way, and what if we change it that way? And I
Right,
remember the two I remember best were, we had my best friend at the time had a character who was ice based, and ice
yep.
armor, uh, in order to be thick, it added weight. So basically, if you use it enough um, to make it really useful, you just were building a fortress around yourself, and you
And you
couldn't.
were so slow,
Right,
everybody else went 8 times and you went
right.
once, right?
So we wound up tweaking, coming with our own set of rules for how ice armor worked in our game, so that he could be an
Right,
active. He didn't have to give up the idea of what the character was in order to protect himself. So he was either free to move around and wimpy, or protected, and he was a tank. So we switched that up. And the other was
nice.
Power Blast, because I had a character that I had envisioned that was able to put all of their energy into do a big pass or small ones. And so we didn't change the rules for everyone, but we came up with a variant for this character, so that he could link his he had a um, much more reduced power point supply, but he could tweak how many points he would use, and as he went up in level, it would uh, the upper end got higher and higher. So
Yep. So
yeah,
cool. So that was, I mean, looking back, that was your big epic gaming campaign. So does your favorite? Somebody had asked about your favorite character that you designed. Does it come from V&V, or is it from the favorite character you played?
favorite character I've ever designed.
Yeah, that you created. Would it be one of the V&V characters, or was it a D&D character later, or for one of the other games at West End?
So um, I had a my first V&V character, which was a randomly rolled one, but
Because that's the
it had
rules, right? You
words.
were you were supposed to randomly
Yeah.
attack, do powers. Yep.
We My friend's ice armor guy and my character, who wound up randomly being like a mix of Wolverine and Nightcrawler. Uh, they we did so much gaming together and invested so much in those characters that I got a very strong affinity towards them. But I think my favorite character I ever made for any game is a gnome rogue I did for the third edition playtest that we wound up playing 7 years of, that Chris
Right,
Perkins ran for us.
right.
I
Nice.
really like that the little guy.
So is it the? I mean, for both of those, there's I can sense the connective tissue between those two stories, right? It's the characters themselves, but it's also the people you're playing with and the stories that you put together, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
that that's what does it, right?
yeah.
Um,
I mean, there's a lot of over my years doing design. There's a lot of mechanically interesting characters that I've put the rules in play or tweaked around so they could happen, and that worked. But you know, I didn't get a thrill out of making a mechanically sound character. I get a thrill out of making it a narratively interesting and fun to play character.
well, it was, and that's goes back to like the first dungeons you were creating,
Yeah,
right? I mean, the cool part about them is there's the story
yeah.
that's underpinning this, right? So, as the artist, were you the person in the gaming group who got to draw everybody else's
Oh yeah.
character?
Oh, I did. I designed everyone's costumes. I, which was great. I did pencils anyway of a first issue of a comic featuring them, and
Somebody just asked if you
yeah,
storyboarded the comic. So,
I didn't
yep.
just
Okay.
storyboard it. I did. I actually, you know what? I inked the first story. Um,
Wow.
so I had it was like a 20-page story, and ended with a nice cliffhanger for what was going to happen in episode two. Um,
Nice.
and I had I had storyboarded for a few other issues. Uh,
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, the artist in the gaming groups, right? There's always that one person in the group, and you're a professional level artist, and when you're looking at the average group, even the person who is just that much better at art than everybody else ends up being the person drawing everyone else's character. So how do you get from there to being a professional, to doing this as a job?
so that group, uh, our our headquarters, our center, our social center was a game in Johnson City, or a comics and game store, and used science fiction bookstore in Johnson City called Fat Cat Books, and so that also broadened the group as there were people who weren't in the college but were at the game store, and
Right.
um, I wound up after I graduated. I wound up staying in Binghamton for another 4 years.
What was your degree in?
English and general literature,
Very nice.
and so that's how we wound up having like an 8 year campaign. Uh, and so at the um, some of the people that I met who came into the group through the bookstore were well, one of the people was Ed Stark, who
Wow. Okay.
had been going. He lived in a town near there. That was the biggest comic book and game store near him. He went to Penn State, but he did his graduate studies at Binghamton. Um, and so there's another Bill Ohmsdahl. I don't know if you know Bill
Oh yeah.
Ohmsdahl?
Sure. Yeah. Bill. Bill. Yeah. He was at
Yeah,
TSR.
who's
Yeah.
also a Binghamton area native, and
Right.
so we were we were all just friends, and Ed was the first of us to get a job in the industry. And as so often happens when someone gets a job in the industry, freelance opportunities abound, and
Right.
everyone who wanted it got a shot. And um, Bill and I were the people that thrived to an extent. Bill was very happy to help out a lot at conventions and such with them and made connections there. He got into the company through their sales department rather than
That's what I. Yeah. I thought. Yeah. I thought that was how Bill worked in sales over there
yeah.
first. Right. Yeah.
And I did freelancing, and then I went off to Japan to teach English and kept in touch and talking to
What
them about when I came back, maybe there would be a job opening. And
what freelancing did you do?
my I wrote a couple of things I think for the Infiniverse, the newsletter that went with Torg, and I did a
Yep.
Torg short story. I think my first full
Was that
paid
the
thing. It was
Nile
in
Empire book?
it was well
Yeah.
it was in it wasn't a Nile Empire. It was a short story collection that had yeah, it was called Mysterious Cairo.
Something like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. That's what I thought.
Yes.
I thought that was where I first saw your stuff. Yeah.
So yes, I did a short story in Mysterious Cairo. Um, and then uh, I was when I was in Japan, I was a co-founder of a group, an English language uh, gaming group, because I needed someone to play with. There
So
was no one.
what year is this when
This
you're in
is
Japan?
I went there in late 1989, and
Okay, so role playing is already really big over there by this point.
it
Well,
yes,
because they have Sword World and
yeah,
you know
like really
the
big
replay books
is
and
yeah. I mean,
Lotus War.
comparatively to it's so hard to say because it's still no one there knew what I was talking about when
Right.
like I'm just saying, hey, I'd like to do role playing games, and they're mm?
It's not mass culture, but the people who are playing are super dedicated to it. And
Yes,
you know, Sword World sold a ton of copies, but it was a ton of copies to a very narrow.
right. I was
Yeah.
certainly there when Steve Jackson Games licensed GURPS.
Yep.
That's the first time I met Steve Jackson was at a convention there
Oh wow.
that they held. That was fun. That's
Yeah, Call of Cthulhu was already pretty big in
yeah,
Japan
yeah.
at that
So
point. Yep.
I did a newsletter for my group, bi-monthly newsletter. I asked people to write little articles. I drew a cartoon for the cover of each one, and
Right.
I was the editor. And I laid it out and printed it on a photocopier at the 7-Eleven.
Nice.
Um, but and I did all of this with a old Mac, an old little there's those one piece Macs with the insert on the side, the floppy on the side,
Right.
and a word processing program because there were no layout programs,
Word
and
Star or whatever it was going to be, and yeah,
it was called Right Now was the app.
there you
It
go.
was a
Word Star and Right Now were the two big ones. Yeah.
uh, and so I laid it out and it looked laid out right. I made the whole thing, and because of that, so I was applying for editorial jobs at West End, and when I came home on a vacation once, I did a pre-interview, so they because I couldn't be there to interview for anything.
Right.
I wound up um, finishing being told we've got a new position and we want to give it to you, but we got to go through this whole thing, and the first one was for when they started the um, Star Wars Adventure Journal,
Right.
and that sounded great. I wanted to do that, and they were like, you're it." And then Pete Schweighofer came in and interviewed, and they're like, "Well, we got to take this guy," and I'm like, "No,
Yeah.
I
Right.
understand
Right.
that
Right.
you got to take that guy, but we got another thing coming up that's for you." And um, I finished. There's another. Miranda Horner came in. It was an editorial position. Miranda Horner came in. They're like, "Well, we got to take her."
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. All right, okay. And then they called me back and said, "Well, we don't have any other editing things coming up, but we've got a position in our art department, in our art and layout. It's assistant uh, um, art director, basically a graphic designer and layout guy. And
Yeah.
because of everything you've done on that newsletter thing, which I've been sending home a copy to Ed each time, he
Right.
got a copy. I said he showed it around. They said this guy's good, so they offered me a job as an assistant art director,
Wow.
and
Okay.
that's and that's what I came on doing.
That's amazing. I mean, that's yeah, that doesn't happen a lot. People jumping from design from the graphic design side to the editorial design part. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, and
so so
I was
how did you make
just good enough. No one, I mean, no one ever told me that, but I looked at what everyone else was doing. Everyone else
right?
in on that team, there were four or five other people, and they lived for doing the graphic stuff. And I was like, I guess I could get this done. I mean,
I can make it square and
you
yeah.
guys
Well,
have any art resources I can borrow, like with little mini ship design? Yeah, okay, I'll just drop that
right.
in because I can make the map and you drop that
But well, I mean, but that was the nature of a lot of the role playing game companies at that
in
point, right? Late '80s was all hands on deck.
all the
If
time.
you have any ability to do X, you're even if you're it's not your job, the
Right.
chances that this project is behind and we need somebody to fill in and do something.
Yeah.
Is that how you ended up jumping to do editorial and design
Well,
or
no, I came in telling they knew I wanted to be an editor, and I was really qualified to do that, and I was starting to do design as freelance while I was doing my day job, doing the layout. I was writing products for them as evening freelance, and
right?
so the agreement was the next time there was an editorial position open, I would segue. They wouldn't need to look for someone in a hiring process. It would be
Right,
me,
right,
which turned out not to be true. There were at least three positions that came and went. That there was a reason why someone else, like one was Bill Omsdahl getting out of sales and into editorial,
right. Okay,
and
because they've been telling him the same thing. The first job that opens up. Yep.
and but the real reason was they were in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, and they couldn't find qualified art guys. No one, like I was now in a position they needed someone in that seat, and if they couldn't find someone to take my place, I couldn't go.
Right, right. Sure, that makes perfect sense, right? Because I mean, you can get a job at any magazine doing that stuff,
Yeah,
and so you're going to be in New York or you're going to be in Chicago or LA or something. There are much sexier jobs in places where there's a lot than out in the middle of nowhere,
and
Pennsylvania, right?
yeah, and pay real money as opposed
And
to
pay not game industry
yeah.
money.
Hey
So,
Ravenlore, glad you could make it.
um, so you finally do make the jump. How many years were you doing the graphic design before
Oh,
you made the jump?
this all happened super fast, right? So I come back in uh, October of '94, um, and in January of '95, Ed Stark leaves to go to TSR,
Right.
and that starts the migration of people to TSR.
Yeah, I was just going to say
Yeah,
that's right around the time of the start of the migration in '94. Yeah.
and another reason why they didn't give me an editorial push was they were sure I was going to TSR. And the fact of the matter is that I'd interviewed and didn't get a job.
Uh-huh.
I
Well, we've
had
all been there. So,
I was tripped up by my own not understanding game industry terminology, uh, because I interviewed for an editorial position, and it went well, um, but David Wise, who was in charge at that time, asked me. He said, "Well, we've got one editorial position. We've got a few design positions. Are you a you're interested in game design?" And I, in my head, I had always thought that there were three roles. Right? There's the editor who does the editing, and the
right,
writer who does supplemental material, and the designer is a person who takes nothing and makes a game. And my only experience of doing that was my old tennis game, which stank.
right. That
And
was
and so I said to him, I really want to, but I don't think I don't have anything to show you that I can, and I haven't done it yet. And he's like, all right, well, we want someone who's done that. when in fact I had already written 3 books.
I was just going to say you've done all of this stuff for West End, in addition
Yeah,
to the tennis game.
I just I answered the question badly, and
Right,
so I didn't get the job, and uh, West End was not moving me out. They weren't fulfilling their promise to me to put me in editorial, and I was really, uh, it was just, I was in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. I was making nothing. I was doing a job I really didn't like. I was starting
right,
to think about going back into teaching.
right.
When all of a sudden one day I'm working on an issue of the Adventure Journal, Star Wars Adventure Journal, and my boss is standing over my shoulder, saying, move that over there, layout. We want that to be read, and the phone rings, and I pick it up, and it's David Wise, who I'd interviewed with and then seen at Gen Con and talked to, and
Right.
everything was friendly. He said, someday. I'm like, great, someday. And so we talked for a couple of minutes, and he says to me, "So, when are you going to come work for me?" And I said, that's a really interesting question. He said, "Your boss is right there." That's yeah, no, that's yes, that's how things are right now. I said,
Yeah,
"Okay,
that
call
is
me
sort of
back."
it. Yeah.
So I called him
Wow.
back, and 2 weeks later, I was in Lake Geneva.
And this is 95 or
This is
96.
'95. This is
Okay.
September of '95,
Okay.
and I come
Wow. So
on.
you came in right before the start of the dark times, right?
Yeah, I was one of the last people. One of the things that's come up on this show a lot is the number of people who got hired in '95. There's what we've taken to calling the class of '95. It
Right.
started with Ed Stark, and it goes through Bruce Cordell and Jeff Quick was early '96. We kind of count him in that block too. But there's
Yep.
about 6 or 8 people whose names became significant over the next 10 years who
Yep.
came in '95.
Yep.
I'm one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that was just and the number of people who came in through West End, too.
Yeah, it's me and Bill and Miranda and Ed. Think that's think that's it. There are a couple people who
Did Bill
did some
Slavicsek
freelance.
come through
Hmm?
West End too? Did Bill Slavicsek come through West End too?
Bill was first of all ahead of us, and
Right.
he had left West End. He was doing freelance.
Oh, okay. Because I knew
So he
Bill
was
had done stuff for them, and he came in right around the time I was leaving
yeah.
in '94. So yeah, I knew there was
But
some overlap.
he'd
I
been
don't know if
doing
he came directly or not.
no, he'd left West End and had been doing a lot of freelance for them
Yep.
when they decided to from my conversation with them, and they said, well, all right, let's hire you full time, cheaper to have you here.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that was always the cycle at TSR was we're not going to hire anybody, and then suddenly, okay, the floodgates are open, and we're gonna hire a bunch of
Yeah,
people. The same thing happened around 90, 89, 90, because I started in 88 and I was employee number
right.
99. We talked about this a little bit, where they didn't hire anybody for a year and a half, and then they hired like 10
Right.
people
And
in 90.
and before West End, they had those slew of people from GDW that they got.
Yep, Lester and yep,
Yeah,
exact. Yeah, Tim and that that group.
Julia and
Yep, yep,
Lazaretti came from there too.
yep,
I think. Yeah.
yep. So you make the jump to TSR, and this is as an editor.
Yes.
Okay.
And um, I'm on
So
a
what was the
team.
first what,
My
what was the first project you worked on?
first project was called Death Ascendant. It was a Ravenloft
Ravenloft. Yeah,
Ravenloft
yeah.
adventure. I was on the team that had Ravenloft and the new Dragonlance Fifth Age, and Dark Sun, and I
Oh,
was
okay.
uh, initially doing all Ravenloft, and I was told they were going to make me the main guy to do editing on Dark Sun. I'd never wound up doing anything for Dark Sun, but they kept telling me, "You be ready. That's what you're doing."
You're gonna be it. Yeah, you're the guy.
Um, but the Dragonlance Fifth Age game was designed by Bill Connors and Skip Williams,
Yep.
neither of whom wanted to stick with it. So they had a game that had, uh, Sue Wineline as the editor,
Yep.
and um, Steve Miller was kind of in there doing design, but they didn't have anyone who was doing. That was it, and they had a
Right.
bunch of stuff. So I uh, jumped in on that side of the team and started doing work there, and I really liked um, I liked the game. And this the one of the I call the huge ironies of my career is that I like D&D, but it's never been my favorite game.
I was going to ask you about that because if you look at the arc for your career, D20 Modern, and it's like it's that tinkering thing, right? It's the
Yeah,
I've got this tennis game that I
I
I want to do something else with.
I like
Um,
small games. I like small rules, compact rules that
right,
have you know cover everything loosely and have room for tweaking and
and that's the Saga stuff and Pokemon
yeah.
Junior, and the D20 Modern.
The
You look at the connective tissue between your designs for those.
the the Warriors game I did for Simon and Schuster. Not Simon
Yep,
was no, wasn't Simon and Schuster. I don't remember the publishing company that did
right.
the Warrior Cats novels.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I they hired me to do a role playing game for them, and so a lot of games I did for audiences that are not the hardcore gamers, and those are the kind of games that I really gravitate towards. So
Yep,
I mean, D20 Modern is the chunkiest of them, uh,
right.
and and I really liked working on that too. But and it's not like I loved all the stuff I did wind up doing for D&D, but it's such a small slice of what I did. It's kind of funny to me.
Right. So I mean, but of the D&D stuff, the Dragonlance stuff, I think might be the most recognizable that you
Yeah,
did, right?
I did a bunch of adventures for uh, marketing things and articles and website articles
Right.
and um, and
Yeah, because if you go from the late
yeah,
'90s to the 2000s, right? I mean, that's the rise of putting together stuff that's being done online
yeah.
and all the rest of
And when we got to uh, Wizards, I immediately made a half. I mean, I never. So I came in at West End, wanting to be an editor, but I came in as a graphic designer,
it,
doing
right?
design, game design freelance. I'd move over to TSR as an editor and game design freelance, and then switch to game design uh,
Right. At
because
Wizard.
because there was an opening and I was good at it and I liked that game. Uh, and that man, that I tell you, I love the Fifth Age. Not just that there there are things I would do differently about the game, but I loved that team. We had Sue Wineline, Miranda Horner, Steve Miller, and I were the core
That
group.
yeah.
We did a lot of work which was not well received and will be buried in history. But
Unjustly.
it was just a ton of fun working with them.
Well, I
But
mean, was the at the time your team was doing that for Dragonlance? Dragonlance was not the high priority thing. I mean, it was, and it's always been the problem with Dragonlance is translating it to the role playing game stuff. I mean, that's after the initial 12 modules, Dragonlance has had a really hard time translating, and so you were handed a tough task on a brand that was not the high priority.
well, there's also so when I got there, it was I think I arrived in September when Dragons of Summer Flame, the novel, came out either in
Right,
August or that, and
and
so
that was yeah.
suddenly
They
the
had gotten
novels
Margaret
were
Tracy
again,
right, exactly. Yeah, they got Margaret Tracy back, so it
yeah,
turned the eye back onto the IP. But over the last 20 years,
yeah,
15 years, the Dragonlance role playing stuff had never been that strong and had never really captured the Dragonlance fiction audience. So
I
you were
would
handed
love, I would love to at some point, spend some either either interview time or work with someone who cares enough to want to do a book about it, because I don't want to write it. But looking at what we tried to do with that fifth age team, because our goal was to
the,
try and make a game that the people who read Dragonlance, the Dragonlance readers, could come to and want to play as much as the D&D players want to play
right,
D&D.
right.
And
And I mean, that's always been the problem, right? The
yeah,
tension between, and that was all through the 90s, the tension between the fiction and the game lines. How do you get that game audience? How do you get that much larger fiction audience to jump to the role playing game stuff, right?
so the fifth age products were in these weird shaped boxes. They were boxes that were made to be the size of a hardcover book,
Right,
because the goal of the team was to get the boxes shelved with the books. And no one on the sales team for 3 years ever came up to us and told us that'll never happen. The bookstores won't do that.
right.
And
They don't
they
mix the
just they
stream.
just took our orders, and we told them this is what we're hoping, and they said okay. And knowing that it would never happen, and so we had these weird shaped boxes that went into the bookstores and got filed in those standing columns and dropped right down and disappeared.
Yep, and the cardboard wasn't the cardboard for the book. You could do a great clamshell version of those games now with covers and snap cases and magnetic locks and everything else that they would work great as in that book format. But the same thing happened with the Marvel game, right? They were that
Yeah,
weird size. The cardboard wasn't very sturdy,
yeah,
so they went into stores and got beat up and put in places that were hard to find, right?
um, yeah.
So
So
somebody had
there's
asked,
that.
how often have you jumped back and forth with people where you edit somebody and then they end up editing you because you've worn both hats?
All the time. And not just editing, like people who were my boss when I got to TSR. So we get out to Renton, and
Yep,
I almost immediately, after already doing this juggle from graphics to editing to writing to uh, uh, and now I get the opportunity to, because of everything shifting around, Sue got made the creative director, and
right,
I got to be her assistant. So now I'm doing management. This is all starting in September of '94 when I get back from Japan into uh, September of '97. All of that happened in those 3 years.
right. I mean, and that goes back to what we were saying earlier
Yeah,
too about the nature of the industry in that 80s to 90s stuff is if you
yeah,
stand still long enough, somehow you're going to be now you have to do the sales conference,
right.
Uh,
And so there, the minute I went into being Sue's assistant, and then when she moved over to the to the web team, I stepped up. Suddenly, the guy who had been my boss 2 years ago is now on my team reporting to me.
okay. So when is that happening? When do you move up to the
And
web team stuff?
that happens uh, by '99, by mid
Okay. So yeah,
'99.
you're out at Wizards when you're out at Wizards when that happens.
At
Right.
Wizards in '97, I become an assistant
Right.
creative director. I don't
Yep.
remember exactly. Hey, Sue's in the chat if she wants to chime in with exactly
Yeah.
when she moved over to the web team. It was somewhere I think in '99, or
Right.
possibly as early as late '98. Maybe not till 2000,
Right.
but
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
somewhere around there.
Yep.
And
Yep.
then I'm a creative director, and I'm not doing any writing anymore or drawing.
Or
All
edit.
I am is managing.
Right. No editing. No writing. No
Yeah.
art. You're just yeah. Were you doing any freelance at that point, or was it all just management all the time?
For a while, I was doing some freelance, but Wizards paid a lot better, and they required a little more attention. So I didn't do as much. I still did. That's when it again got into doing stuff for the web team or short adventures.
Yeah.
Everything I did was short from that point on. I
Oh
didn't
yeah,
do
that's right.
much
Yeah. Sue jumped to periodicals in '98 to work
periodicals in '98.
on
So there you
amazing with
go.
Kim, right? Yeah,
98. But from
to work on amazing.
94, when I can't get an editing job, I cycled through the whole thing to being a creative director in 1998.
Yep. And all of the training you got on how to handle those jobs.
Well, I mean,
Uh,
that was one of the nice things that, yeah, everything previously I didn't. But for the management, Wizards sent a group of us. Sue was in that group. Sue and Bill Slavisek were both in that group to go to a business management certificate program, like a
oh
6 month
wow.
certificate program at the University of Washington. It was
Right.
like a reduced MBA. Right? It was all the things you would learn in an MBA in the smaller slices.
Did that? Yeah, Sue was just asking about that. Did that help you?
Yeah,
Do you think that was helpful?
I think it helped me. Yes, yes. I don't know that uh, some of the things I probably should have taken more. Like if I'd paid a little better attention in the sections about budgeting and things like that. Really, what I learned is I want someone on my staff to do that for me.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, these are
But
things
there
I
were a
don't ever
lot of
want to
things
go.
I learned about how things work together and how the looking at a corporate level for how things work. And the things that worked best for me and slotted best into what I cared about and kind of thrived at were the human resources sections, um, which were both interesting on the corporate level, but had real application as a creative manager. And I think that
Right.
they were very helpful um, when I wound up at Upper Deck. Again, came in as a writer and wound up within 6 months being the manager.
So you were at Wizards then until when?
2002. I
Two.
was
Yeah.
there for on the chopping side of two layoffs and on the chopped side in the third.
Of the third. Okay. Okay. And so you jump to Upper Deck and you do a couple
Yeah.
of other independent
Well,
companies too.
no. First thing we did was start the game mechanics. A couple of
That's
us
right. Yeah.
got laid
Exactly.
off on the same day, and the game mechanics, one of the early third party D20 stuff, because and that's where I did the most of my work on D20 Modern that people recognize. I was not one of the
Right.
core designers on that at Wizards. I was one of the second tier, really interested helping hand. Kind of the other design by people.
Right.
Um,
Additional
but
design.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Uh, but I mean, I had a real influence on D20 Modern. It doesn't come up very often, but when they were designing it originally, there wasn't going to be a tough hero. They had heroes for everything else, but no one could figure out. There was like, there's no such thing as a tough hero, and I came into the meeting. I said, "Oh, you have to have a tough hero. You've
Right.
got every other thing," and they're like, "Stan, if you can tell us," it's Bill Slavisek in particular, because he'd done a short version of that as a mini game that was in Polyhedron magazine,
Right.
uh, and he had left the tough hero out because he couldn't figure out what a tough hero was. He said, if you can tell me, everyone else ties to a figure from movies or culture,
Right.
like who is a tough hero? If we can solve that, then we can build a character around it. And I looked, I said, Rocky Balboa. Rocky
Yeah. Right.
Balboa is a tough hero.
Right.
And they said, oh no, we've got him as strong. I was like, Rocky's, I mean, yeah, he's strong, but his superpower is you hit him and he keeps taking it.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
Right. And suddenly, like John McClane went from being, John McClane, he's also a tough hero. And it's like suddenly uh, they pulled a third of the people they had slotted for strong over to tough, and tough
Right.
hero became a thing.
Right.
So. I I don't I I'm sure there are other people who were in the room who remember that. I don't walk around patting myself on the back, but the tough hero, that's mine.
There you go. Well, I mean that's it. I mean that's partly the nature of how these games are put together and how the teams worked at TSR and at Wizards and still work at all kinds of publishers where they're sort of that gestalt, almost put together as film crews where people don't have very clearly defined roles. You may be key grip today, but you're going to be operating the boom tomorrow.
But
And so the input and the creative flow for all this is very loose. And so that's where the teams you had mentioned, working with the team on the Dragonlance stuff with Sue and Steve, and that makes a huge difference
yeah,
in what those look like. So you jumped to design mechanics, and then you did Upper Deck, and you did and those were again things where you immediately jump to do creative stuff, and then you get sucked into management.
I applied for that job as a writer on the staff. It was just
Right.
a basic writer position, and the interview was like, "Well, we're not hiring you. We don't have a, a creative uh, uh, director job. We don't have that role." I'm like, I just want to write. Just let me
Right.
write. That's all I
Yeah.
want to do.
It would be
I'm
really nice
happy to
to
come
not
on
have.
here and be a writer. And
Yeah.
about 3 or 4 months into me being there, there was a bit of a scandal, and
Oh yes. Right.
the guy who had been, no, I don't think this was a public scandal. This was before the public scandal.
I
This
know some of the people who are
All right,
working, Hiram, and some of the other people who are working over there.
right,
So
yeah.
yeah,
So
I have an idea what you're talking about.
the guy who had been in charge of the writing team, um, kind of put himself in an untenable position, and then made a very public bad move, and so it was, and then kind of stood there and said, "Nope, this is how it's going to be, or you're going to have to get rid of me." And so they, the really interesting thing for me was like, I'm just a writer, I don't care, right?
Right.
And I got called into a meeting with the head of the department, who said, "I just, I've you've been around. I want to tell you what I'm thinking about doing and get your feedback on it because you're in the group and I'm not." And he
Right.
starts listing how he wants to move things around, and so is going to do this, and so is going to do that. And I'm thinking, you're not saying, are you about to tell me I'm fired? Because I'm not in any of these slots. Like, you're describing how the whole thing works, and none of the slots where I fit have me in it.
Here's where everyone will live,
Right.
and you have no address.
Yeah. And he
Um,
says, and I was thinking that you'd be in charge. And I'm like, oh,
ah,
okay.
this was good.
But
Yeah, that went in a different direction than I was thinking. Uh,
and and so the next week I was in charge of the writing and editing team. And there went my nice easy job writing.
some someday I'll get to do creative stuff again. So somebody was tough, basically tank before the video game
Uh,
archetype.
it's yeah,
Analogous,
I don't know. I don't know that it's before. I mean, they're kind of the same. That's the same time that the video games
right?
were developing
Right.
that kind of thing. But yeah, yeah,
But it goes back to the D&D. I mean, villains and vigilantes, superhero stuff too, right? I mean,
right,
because there are those characters that do damage absorption and that sort of stuff, and
right.
you're
Yes.
looking at those. So, um, so you were upper deck for a while, and
I was there, uh, another short term because then they'd collapsed.
right, right,
This time I was the second person to get, uh, let go in what turned out to be the start of a culling. It took, JD Weicker was on my team, and
right,
um, he got called down to HR. The head of HR called him and asked him to come down, and he looked at me and he said, "Do you know what this is about?" And I'm like, I don't. I really don't." And he goes down, and Hiram, you mentioned Hiram
Yep.
there. Hold on, we just sneeze. Excuse me.
Last
Um, and Hiram and I are sitting there going, do you know what it is? I don't know. What are they calling JD for? And then I get a call saying, hey, Stan, can you come down here? And I'm like, all right, well, they're going to tell me what happened to JD. And it was, they did. They also told it was happening to me.
Now I can go back and tell you what's going on.
Yeah.
Surprise.
So,
Ugh.
and so then I just went into freelance all the time.
So, but I mean, some of that freelance was back working on
Right. I did.
D20
I
OGL
had
stuff, right?
two contracts with Wizards to come back and
And
do.
yeah, and directly working with Wizards too,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so Jeff Grubb describes D&D as an IP as having gravity. That once you've worked on it, if you're not careful, you find out you actually can't escape it. You circle too close to it, you will eventually get pulled back into working on D&D stuff again. Do you think that's true? I mean,
Well,
in your case, right?
yeah. I mean, I don't. I don't think that's wrong. But I think part of it is that everything that's not D&D has such light gravity that it's hard to make it happen. And very often, having that D&D, when I need to do something, when I can't get anything to work, well, if I go back a little closer to D&D, my name means more,
Right,
and the sales, the audience is bigger. And
right.
doing this show is the first solid D&D related thing, but I one of the reasons I was doing it is to get my visibility up. My visibility just through attrition had kind of I was the answer to some trivia questions. I wasn't someone that people knew, and I wanted
Well,
to
and
change that.
yeah, I mean, well, and again, that's the other part. That's the other half of that gravity thing. The nature part of it is, yes, D&D has gravity, and yes, you get pulled back on this because it is the 8,000 pound gorilla in the role playing game market. But at the same time, the people who have worked on it have their names erased over time. And you can work on something and come back, something you did in the 90s or something you did
Yeah,
in the early 2000s, and it gets resurrected and it's being strip mined and being used for new material. And
yeah.
you come back and you're being asked to work on something you created and no one knows that you were connected to
Yeah, there are a lot of meetings of a lot of the Wizards shed a lot of institutional knowledge. So when I went back on um, my temporary contracts, it was to do a specific thing. But one of the roles I really played was to be a re-repository of, why did they do that? Well, I can tell you why they did it.
it. Right, right. I mean, well,
Yeah,
that was, when I got back involved with Tomb of Annihilation when that was coming together was through you initially,
yeah,
right? I mean, I had heard it was happening and I pinged you and said, they're strip mining my novels and stuff for this. I would be happy to look at the characters and, artists and Aramag and all that stuff I created. And you went to Chris Perkins and said this would be a good idea. We can do this reasonably, and
yeah,
that was how it happened. And it was entirely due to your institutional knowledge telling them. It wasn't that they were. Oh no, I was super happy about that. I got to save the city of Mesro from having been destroyed in fourth edition. Brought it back, but you know, and that's been great for everybody. It was great for me. I got the creative stuff done. People have done stuff for the DMs Guild with it, and it's all super positive. But what you said is, your institutional knowledge made that possible,
yeah,
and that's something that isn't strong at connected to the brand.
yeah.
So, um, so is it? Did you find that it was more satisfying going back and being able to do that stuff, or was it frustrating? Was it
It,
both? Was it
it, it was
neither?
it was both. I mean, it certainly is. I got to tell you one of the things I got to do because I went back. was I got to write an editorial for Dragon magazine, which I would never have gotten because it was in its digital only phase, and one
Right.
of my jobs was to shepherd it out. And so on my last month there, Chris said, "Why don't you write the editorial?"
Super cool. Right. Yeah. I
Hmm.
mean, well, because I mean, you go back to what's your introduction to D&D,
Yeah,
right? What's your introduction? How are you coming into this? You're reading what the Kim Mohan era
right.
of Dragon, right? And
I'm, I'm trying to
what
find a
you
picture. I wish I could find it. I know it's not on my. I can't find it easily on my. Uh, um,
hello, Maryland. Greetings from
hello,
Maryland.
hello.
Hello, hello.
I can't find it easily on my machine on my computer, but
Right.
oh, here we go. I got to on my very last day of my second contract. They they let me go and look at
Oh, wow.
the original. They'd found the original painting of the Holmes box, which is a
Which
good
is
story on its own.
which is of course horrifying in itself that they didn't know where it was, right?
Well, no
Um,
one knew where it was. It was in one of those for years since moving out to Lake Geneva. There have been storage units that have either been owned or paid for. That eventually they either wanted to stop paying the bill or they sold the building that it was in,
right,
and so pallets of stuff would show up, and we would go through it, and you never knew. There was a lot of just product that came
right,
out of there, but there were legal archives that came out of there and original art that came out of there, and
right.
that was one of the last ones. Was that and as you say, when it showed up, whoever found it just thought this must be a piece of fan art. Maybe we should throw it out.
It,
No, let's check.
oh,
It was this close to getting thrown out.
oh my God. And now, I mean, and this is what you're doing with this show as well, right? With this podcast as well, is capturing this history that we know from our time going back to TSR. A lot of this stuff just got thrown out. Things just went away. I have a prototype for the Larry Elmore cover for Crusade, my first novel, that the art department was going to throw away because it
Yeah,
was an FBO piece that he did for the catalog. It wasn't the final, but they were just going to throw it out, and all of those sketch things got thrown out. And Minister Ratliff,
oh,
um,
John,
hi John.
talk
Um,
about. Oh, sorry. Finish what you're saying.
Yeah, and no, and so I mean, this is the sort of thing. How does that happen with the Holmes thing? Well, because it got put in a room at TSR somewhere, and they were actually fortunate that it got bundled up because it very easily could have either gone home with somebody at some point, or it could have gotten thrown away.
Yeah, talking to when I was talking to Steve Sullivan and Diesel
Right,
uh, um, and Todd Lockwood talking about the point where all of a sudden TSR said, "You know what? We own your paintings."
right,
And so they just took them and threw them in closets places. They didn't know it. They just knew they owned it, so they would keep
right,
it. And
right,
that piece just was sitting in a closet with a bunch of other stuff.
right. Yeah, I mean, and that was it, right? And that was one of the things that happened when Peter Atkinson came in and released all of the originals back to the artists, and
Mm,
that kind of thing. For a lot, I had heard for a lot of that art got repatriated where it should
yeah,
have ended up after with the buyout. But that it's depressing to think of all of that stuff that actually never made the jump. I mean, all the original book manuscripts that what an archive would do right now with all of the
right,
drafts for the Grist novels, right? Or the original Dragonlance novels,
right.
who wouldn't want all 18 drafts of that with the editor's marks and all of that? All gone, all gone. Because it was all done on paper, right?
Right.
I
No,
mean,
there was
that's
no computer at that point. That was all. physical media.
Yeah, TSR. Well, and from the late '80s to the early '90s, you were talking about this before with your experience too, with laying out, your zine, and that was just the start of this. But the TSR was actually ahead of New York on adopting, authors submitting things
Yeah,
on disc, but the majority of all the editing that went back and forth between the authors and the editors, all of that was still done on paper. The same thing with the notes coming out of the game department; those
yeah.
were all still done on paper. So,
I was going
so
to say, talking about things that you know never saw the light of day, but floated around. I've been talking. Someone has been asking me recently about Pokemon Junior, which could be a conversation all on its own.
a whole
But
show.
best selling product that was a complete and utter failure ever. Um, that was supposed to be a line of products, and in fact, a lot of work had been done on follow ups to the point that I have the mock up from the second box. There,
Wow,
there were two of these. Jeff Quick has the other one. There are two of these that were made mock ups of what the second Pokemon Junior box would have been, and
very cool.
I've kept that all of these years.
And that's such a good game. It really is. It's such a
Thank,
good game.
thank you. I
Um,
I
so,
often
so
get, you know what, I think it's worth bringing up here. I often get granted credit as being the person. Bill Slavisek also worked on that. We designed it together.
right,
It's so I I don't want to have a Leon Ditko or Leon Kirby issue where I cut him out of the story.
right, right, right.
It
Yeah,
was mostly me, but Bill helped. Bill helped too.
but
Yeah.
he was in the room when it happened.
Oh
But
yeah. Oh yeah.
so you were saying that the biggest, most successful failure. What's the context for that?
So I would say there's a long version of this story, but the shortest version that tells enough of it is that this happened. Pokemon the card game was exploding. Wizards had made a ton of money. Hasbro had bought Wizards. At the
Right,
same time, the RPG business team came up with an idea to do a stepping stone strategy to help get past the satanic panic and the confusion of what is a role playing game and is it safe, to start doing a series of products that would be role playing products that started when kids were very young and led up to the D&D intro box set, so that that became a natural stepping stone rather than a leap on point that you didn't know how they got to.
yeah. Which is,
And the
and
first of that
Pokemon's
is,
the perfect IP for that at that time. I
yeah.
mean, could not ask for a better IP for that.
So I had been the person that had done Pokemon research, and they asked me what I thought about this. They brought an expert in to talk about what cognitive skills that kids had at different uh,
Wow.
areas. So they planned out at this level, at the Pokemon Junior level, what they wanted was a game that introduced the idea that you're playing a game that has characters that are not you, but you make them do things. And that was
To distance the satanic panic stuff and to make sure that that's clear, and
uh,
bringing in the educational consultant is amazing because of course that's how the book department starts in the early '80s at TSR, because they try to do math,
right.
modules that you can learn math skills from, and that completely fails because it is the worst possible time in the early '80s to try and sell that into
Right.
schools. So, but it actually they circle back to that now with
Yeah.
Pokemon Junior.
So that was the goal, and my original and I was handed the assignment to do that. This was a period where I had been a creative director. The things I had been directing were second edition, and third edition happened, and there was no need for a creative director anymore. They weren't sure what they were going to do to me, so with me, not to
Right.
me yet.
That
Uh,
would come
so
later.
so I started having different assignments. I was kind of uh, doing lots of things. And there's one where it really matched my interest and my knowledge level.
Yeah.
Lived in Japan, which they seemed to think was an important part of it. Uh,
Sure. Well, because
so
you can help translate what the cultural strength of it is,
yeah,
and you've seen it in the wild there, and yeah.
so I designed a game. We did some. We actually took it out for market testing. Two-way mirrors and question and answers
Wow.
afterwards. The first game I did was too complicated, and time was growing short. So Bill, who was my boss, we talked about it, and so we decided to. There wasn't enough time for me to do it on my own, so he came in and we looked at what I'd done, talked it over about if we cut it down to this, and I said, no, and I came back with a quick prototype, and Bill said that's good, and we split up the chores on actually developing that.
Excellent.
And so that happened. In the meanwhile, the company is sold to Hasbro, and
Right.
um, you know what, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna sell out some folks here. So when we're getting ready to do this, we'd gone to the sales department and said we're gonna do this game for Pokemon, and they said, great. Oh, we can sell the hell out of
Right.
that. And this could be great. It could go to all kinds of different stores. By the time it it we're at the point where we're getting ready to do our print orders, we go back to them and say, okay, how many should we print? And they look at it and say, we can't possibly sell that. No, don't even make it. What are you talking about? Like, you told us.
Right.
And like, no, I don't remember that at all. I don't remember that at all.
Those were
Same
evil
person.
twins.
Same person.
Yeah, that was my evil twin. I didn't actually say that. Yeah.
However, Hasbro uh, sales heard about this game and they said, well, we want to sell it into Toys R Us and Walmart and other big places.
Because
You
they're seeing
can't do
Pokemon
that.
card game. They're
Yeah.
seeing Pokemon card game money from it. Yeah.
So there got to be this big kind of back and forth. First of all, Hasbro insisted on printing it themselves for what, because they didn't trust it. Wizards would make a high enough quality book, but Wizards insisted on printing it themselves. So Wizards got to sell into hobby, Hasbro got to sell into big books, and they each had their own print runs. And so
Right.
they had a meeting about how many they were going to print. And I remember hearing about this when it happened. Because the guy who just come into our meeting and told us he couldn't possibly sell it, when Hasbro said they wanted it, he said, "Well, we'll print 150,000 of those." And Hasbro said, "Well, we're going to print 500,000 of those." And they said, "Oh, you think it's good? You know what? We're going to print 800,000." So
Oh
in the end,
no.
they wound up printing 1.5 million copies of the game. Um, and
Which is which is so many at the time. Like this is mid 2000s, early 2000s.
This is right around 2000, yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
2000,
Yeah. Yeah.
2001.
Right around 2000. Yeah. And so that is so many multiple times what D&D was selling. and and
So
and the market for role playing games is not Stranger Things
yeah,
postage
but
stamp.
it was a box like this,
Right. Right.
um, and they'd insisted on very high quality stuff. So this was like a 12 $10 $12 box, which
Right.
is not crazy expensive, but
Well, in 2000, that's still a pretty high price point
yeah.
for an intro level if you're hoping to sell it to kids game.
And so it goes out, and the game stores don't know what to make of it, don't buy it. It Hasbro doesn't really sell it that well, and it doesn't do well at all. And they've now got 1.5 million, and someone comes along. I don't know who. I don't know which end of it. They come along and they make a deal to remainder it.
Right.
Very still within the first few months of its release,
Oh
and
my god.
I think that it was Walmart basically bought all of it
Yeah.
for
So
a
so what
remainder
happens with
price.
what happens with remaindering for people who don't know what the process for that is? There are places make their living buying the overprinted material from publishers. So all of those discount books that if you go into Barnes and Noble and the books at the front that are all selling for $5 for this Stephen King hardcover, what they've gone through is they've bought all of those for pennies on the dollar, and then they sell them again into places like that,
Right.
and they make their money on what they sell them for. And so if it sells for 50% of cover price or 20% of cover price, whatever it is, they've paid 10% of cover price or 5% of cover price or
Yeah.
less, depending on how many you're trying to go to get rid of. So
So
there are
yeah,
whole operations that do this,
well,
and so
not
that's
this one. The original box
the
comes
original
in
one. Yeah. So
at
so one of these places,
$12.
yep, either one of these places, or even like you said, maybe Walmart directly said we can blow these out as a discount item at our stores, so we're willing to buy all of them, or they bought them through Texas Bookman or one of the other remaindering places. Yeah, Ollie's does. Yeah, somebody mentioned Ollie's. So Ollie's either buys that stuff directly or they work with the remaindering houses and then get them from them cheap. So
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
So the Pokemon Junior got remaindered, got bought up, and Pokemon now is blowing up even bigger. So they price it at $5 and
Right.
put it in the big box stores, and it flies off the shelves. And they
Right.
sell in that initial year sold. Uh, Ryan Dancy tells me, who's the business manager at the time, he told me at the time that he came in one day. He said, "Congratulations, sold 800,000 units. You're the best-selling role-playing game ever." It sold 800,000 units at
Huge,
yeah.
huge for the market. Again, yeah, amazing, right?
Now you look at that, and that means there's still 700,000 units left because they overprinted so high. But at
Right,
$5, I'm I'm told I was no longer with the company, so no one came and told me officially. But I'm told
right.
that the whole of it sold out by the end of the next year. So
That wouldn't surprise me at all, because that's what
one point,
initially that's one of the places I saw it was at
yeah,
KB or
yeah.
Toys R Us or something like that, where they were selling them as 50% off of what the list price was. So
So 1.5 million of these things sold in less than 2 years, and
wow.
it's one of the greatest failures they ever did.
Well, you and Bill should be proud of the game because it's super good.
Oh,
I'm a big fan of it. So I
I'm
mean, the idea of what you were trying to do with the art form, and well, it's what you were saying earlier, right? Trying to do something with role playing games and
yeah.
getting them to go to a different audience, right? I mean, that's prime.
And
So
the stepping stone, uh, that also killed the stepping stone. Well, I mean, Ryan's team had lost a political fight, and what they were doing was getting yanked anyway. But
right,
the fact that Pokemon Junior did so badly really kind of killed that whole
right.
project. And there were
So
other
so
games like I designed the Step Two was also going
right,
to be a Pokemon product, and I finished initial design. It was in development. It was going to be called Pokemon Master, and
nice.
there was and there you were teaching them that the character could change over time. So instead of this game, you with the Pokemon Junior, you had a card and it just stayed the same. In Pokemon Master, you had a very simple kind of card slash character sheet, and you could add stickers on it to make it better, so that the character would change over time. And your
Oh, the
Pikachu
sticker
was
idea is
different than
super
someone
cool.
else's Pikachu.
Yeah, super cool. That the sticker idea is great. Yeah, John Ratliff just mentioned the Harry Potter stuff that
Yeah,
Wizards was
yeah. And
trying to
there's a
put
Harry
together at one
Potter
point
game
too.
that got done. There was a Crocodile Hunter game that got part way through development. And a bunch of things, and they all just got yanked.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean there, and that's again, that lost history thing. All of the potential role playing game products that got started, when after Wizards bought TSR, they offered me a job to come out and work as the fiction person on the Magic. What was
Yeah,
going to be the relaunch of the Magic, and I think John Ratliff was going to be the game designer on that for the role playing part, and then there was going to be a relaunched fiction line that would go with it, and all of this was right after the buyout, and that didn't even last a year, I don't think, before it. Fortunately, I said no because that didn't end well. Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. Well, I mean, at least all right. So if you had that product that did 1.5 million copies and it got out there, right? It's a good game.
Yeah.
So the number of people who got that game and maybe tried it, you think that the good that did for what people think of as role
Yeah.
playing games, right?
I've seen. I mean, I've seen write ups of it in educational journals.
Yep.
And I've talked to a lot of people. Uh, come up and showed me what their kids did with their versions of it, and
Nice.
uh, I was telling you before we came on, I was recently approached by someone who's doing. I don't know whether they're making an article or a video or something, but they're diving deep into the history of the game. So it's one of those pieces out there that if you know about it, you think, what happened?
Right. Right. Right.
How
And
could
well, I
this have
mean,
been gone wrong?
well, and it's there was a number of products, especially at TSR. We were talking a little bit about Spellfire and
Yeah,
Dragon Dice, and even the
Dragon
TSR
Dice. Yeah,
collector cards. Right, the first year sells really well, and years two and especially years three are giant disasters, and the games are those boxes are remaindered very quickly because they
yeah.
just misread the market. So that happens a lot. So
My
you've
tell
won
you
all
for
these.
Dragon for Pokemon Junior, my biggest regret of anything is that um, when the contract ended and the Pokemon Company took the products back, they got the rights to that with everything. And I've certainly known people that have worked there. I've applied for jobs that I haven't got, but known a lot of people who've been in positions like they should have made another. This should have been something that even if
Yeah,
they just released it as a sub package of something else or only online, this
yep,
it kills me. It kills me that Pokemon never saw the value in making versions of that. And again,
yeah.
I will sometimes get contacted by Pokemon fans who ask me about how I would do it for this set or that set or the
Right. So, yeah, please get, yeah. So when projects get killed, somebody asked if you could reskin it and release a version on your own. That's perilous because technically, if you're an employee of the company, the employee owns that material. And because this was a license, it's even more perilous
yeah.
because Wizards doesn't own it. The Pokemon company owns it.
The
And
I mean, certainly if you had the right IP to go on it, it would the mechanics are so light. This game again, I keep
yeah,
holding this up like it's this one, but the Pokemon Junior is mechanically and gamey. It's so much just a narrative thing
yeah,
that it would totally be possible to find a correct way for a different IP to do a similar thing.
yeah.
But
Well, you can't
to,
copyright game mechanics, so maybe that's the way in for
yeah,
you, right? I mean, this is not copyrightable, the concept for the game stuff, but
yeah.
yeah, it's always risky when you try to do something like that.
I had,
So
but to answer that other question, I had thought about doing a version of the Saga rules, a Saga card deck, because we had already taken notes on what we would wanted to do as a second edition or version 2.0 of the basic card mechanics, and that in itself it's just a deck of cards that you're flipping up, and uh, um, if you take that name off it, there are any number of card based games.
right,
How do you tell which one is the influence on it?
right, yeah, yeah, that's a great idea. So you've worn all these different hats. If you Which one was your favorite of the different roles that you've had? Is it designer? Is it editor? Is it, since you wanted to come into the industry originally as an editor? Is it artist, right?
For me, if there's the one that I want to do most is cartooning. There's a reason why I start all these episodes saying, and I've taken to introducing myself as your cartoonist pal Stan. That's what
Yep.
I love doing the most. Um, when it comes to thinking of things to do that'll make some money,
And
I
money,
I
money, money. Always, when we're talking about the role playing game industry, is in quotes for money.
get someone to
Role
pay
playing
for
game
it.
industry. Right.
A card. I would love to have a project um, that would be a role playing light that I could be in. I don't need to be the only person that comes up with it, but I could be involved in the team that develops a narrative, and I get to do the illustrations for it. And
Right.
after launching it, I can focus mostly on high high narrative and visualizations,
Right.
storytelling, and the cartooning.
Nice. Yeah. Okay.
Those are the things I
What
love the most.
what role did you dislike the most? I know. I think I know the answer.
It was being a layout jockey.
Oh,
Being
really? Okay. I was going to say manager, but
no, you
there
know
were
what?
parts.
There are things I really liked. Their management certainly had the worst part of it on the bad parts of management. But I really like as a creative manager, a manager of people who are working on things to help them to get uh, to get their visions done, to stay on track, to talk through what's happening. Then particularly people who are new to working in the field. That goes back to my teaching background, right? I like
Yeah, I was just going to say that absolutely is part of teaching. There's a great documentary called Turn Every Page
mm,
about Bob Gottlieb and the author of the Johnson biographies. They've worked together for like 50 years, and Gottlieb talks a lot about what the editorial impulse is, and the editorial impulse is to fix things and make them better and help the creators get their vision out there, which is exactly what you're saying. So kind of you were basically doing the hybrid.
yeah,
I'm the editorial manager role here,
yeah.
doing the I've
So
got power now to actually do what I want to do as an editor, right?
power.
Yeah, power. It's all about power.
So I like that part too much for management to be the thing I like the least.
Okay.
Um,
And that
doing
makes perfect sense.
yeah, doing just graphic design and layout. Like I said when we were talking a little earlier, I had enough skills to qualify for it, but it was never something I loved. And in fact, when I had to do it every day and that's all I did, I found it soul crushing.
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah. Okay. So if there is one product that you worked on for your career that you would want people to identify, think of this product and think of your name. And it's in whatever role, right? Whether you did art for it or, it's your Dragon editorial. But if there was a product that you would want people to connect to you, what would it be?
yeah. All right. So I have two answers to this. One is
Yep.
products that I did do.
Right,
Of all the products I did, the one that I'm I'm most happy to have my name. It's Pokemon Junior is a close second, but my
right.
favorite
Okay.
is the Dragonlance Bestiary that I did for the Fifth Age game. Um,
Why?
because it is the vision of that is that it was an in-world book uh, that that played very closely to what was published in the novels and the
Right.
game products, and uh, and told the story of the creatures, and then the rules are just and the rules you needed. But
Yep.
it would the idea was that it comes across as an in-world artifact that talks
Yep.
about the world, and I really am so proud of what that book came out as, and it certainly helped along. But Don Muir and the art team did such a great job making it look and feel like that. But man, that's the product that I'm If there was one that I'm remembered for,
Yeah,
I'd love it if
yeah.
it was that.
Well, I mean, and that's I mean, part of that too is what you're describing as you're talking about that is you had this vision for what that product should be, and what came out in part because of the people you're working with, the other people on your team,
I wasn't supposed to work on that product either. That was another one that landed in my
right?
lap. It
Right.
was going on right at the time of the collapse at TSR, and the guy who was supposed to write it kept saying, "Yeah, he's working on it," but in the end, when what got turned over was a spreadsheet of numbers,
Here's the yeah.
and
Here are the stats for the stuff we're going to do. Yeah. Turn this into a product.
yeah,
That's
so I got it, and
that's
man,
amazing.
I'm so happy I did.
So
The other answer is if
yeah,
there's a hypothetical product,
right.
uh,
Yeah,
it would be a new this
right.
a game, a product which is it's fiction and it's art, and there's a game in it, and you can hand it to the new people. Then, if they don't want to play the game, they can enjoy the fiction. If they're too young to read, they can color the pictures.
Right.
Um, that
I had not thought about that. I had not thought about that coloring book in those terms, but based
I
on how it was an on ramp for you for this, right? I mean,
yeah
what you described that really succinctly about how that became that sort of gateway for you into role playing games.
yeah
Um,
I've pitched this idea to a dozen different people and companies,
yeah,
and the reaction almost always is wow, that's really interesting, that would be super great. No, we don't have any money to do that. We should do that someday.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like,
that's a great idea, but no, yeah, right. Okay.
and it's also the
Um,
kind of thing that if I do it on my own, first of all, problem as a freelancer is that it would take so long to do. I can't do it on my own without someone funding it. And
because you're turning down other work to do it,
yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah.
the opportunity
Um,
cost.
and it's so much better if it's attached to some kind of existing IP that it's moving toward, right?
Yeah,
People play
yeah,
do have it, and when they're done, they go to the intro box set or the larger box set, or they buy it for their kids while they're playing the game.
right, right. Yeah, yeah, and it serves as that real on ramp for something that there are things beyond it, right?
Yeah.
Um, okay. So out of all of the places you worked and all of you're talking about teams and things like that, is there a sweet spot for you in your career when you think back on all of the creative groups that you were with, that if you had to say that's the Field of Dreams era for Stan, where is it?
Um,
Is there one? I mean, it doesn't, not everybody's going to have that, but is there one?
I I I mean, I mentioned it earlier. My time working with the Fifth Age team, the Fifth Age team was, I mean, because we weren't just doing that; we were working on other products in that
Yep,
group. And
yep,
what we did then, we were responsible for managing the the Dragonlance to an extent, and at the time that Margaret and Tracy were back in, we were responsible for managing the handover and the reconnection of it. I think that
yep. And you could
yeah, I
see, I
look
mean, it
back on
all,
that as a time I would love to find myself in that kind of creative space again.
yeah, because I mean, and you can see that even in the Dragonlance projects that you guys worked on. I mean, I'm really sensitive to this when I look at this stuff from the outside. That there was a real effort to try to dovetail the fiction and what you were doing with games, and do it in a respectful way that respected the fans and respected the fiction, and
Yeah.
put it all together. And so, yeah, that's that's really cool. That's really cool. Um, All right. So you talked last time when you were wrapping up with Jeff and Steve. You were
Yeah.
talking about the future for the show. Do you have any more details about that you can share?
So I'm talking to people to be guests. Um, and they're still people who have been deeply involved. Some of them on D&D. Like next week, if everything works out, and if it doesn't happen next week, it'll happen sometime in the future. I'm gonna have Rob Schwab on.
Rob's the best. Yeah,
Yeah,
Rob.
Rob's awesome.
Yep.
He did work on D&D. He's done a ton of work on his own stuff.
Yep.
I'm looking at broadening out. I know that this year is the 25th anniversary for Green Ronin, so I'm looking at having some
Oh,
Green
nice.
Ronin folks
Yep.
on.
Yep.
Um, I know that next year or the year after is the 50th anniversary for Call of Cthulhu, which is
Chaosium's 50th as a company is this year.
all right. So
Call of Cthulhu
Chaosium.
came out in '81, so
All
that's
right.
a couple more years away. This would have been the war game, the
Right.
Glorantha war game that Greg put together, White
Um,
Bear Red Moon. That would have been the first Chaosium product.
all right.
So yeah,
Well,
this is
in
the,
any
yeah,
case,
this,
I'm a huge Call of Cthulhu fan, so bringing some Cthulhu stuff in.
yep,
And I did talk about this. I've I haven't done enough work to say how it'll happen, but I really want to pull together some episodes. So some of the episodes will be just like the old ones, where I'm talking to someone and doing a drawing. Like when I do
right,
Rob, I will do a drawing while I'm talking to Rob.
right.
But I would love to do
And it'll be Rob, so it'll be super profane, and you will have to blank you'll have to blank out parts of the screen.
just
Um,
pixelate the whole screen.
Not yet exactly, and pixelate Rob just to be safe. And yeah.
Um, but having, and I know I talked to you briefly about this as one of the people to possibly be involved in some of these is group conversations, like getting the for a couple of the different D&D worlds, right? To didn't talk a lot about birthright that in these conversations
Yeah,
because it had a
get Rich
but there was
to talk
a
about that,
team,
and yeah,
yeah, having
yeah,
them on it, having I talked to you and Sue, who's in the audience still, about having an editorial day where I get folks, just two or three or four editors to
yep,
talk specifically about that angle of it. Um, some more artists, some more authors. So really, my hope for this season two is that it's a lot like the first season, but um, I didn't feel constrained by that D&D thing. There's
yeah,
I could have done a second year of just that, but I
yep,
really like the idea of embracing the the anniversary and the entirety of tabletop role playing games, which is
right. Well, that's all part of the dungeon, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's D&D was the first, but it went in other places, and your career has
yeah,
been pushing the games, Pokemon Junior, and all of it, right?
yeah,
Pushing the game in other directions.
yeah. Michael, yeah, it's talking about people who've gone on to do computer games. So many
Oh
people
God,
have gone out of
Yeah, Warren Spector, and he was there at TSR when I first started, and went on to be a computer game industry legend.
yeah.
So yeah, absolutely.
Zeb and
Um,
Bill and Jeff all are people that have done that now too. Andy
and
Collins, more
And
recent.
Michelle Vukovic, who was
Yeah,
in the audience for a while. Yeah, I mean, all of
yeah.
that. The number of people who jumped over there were great. So that's cool. Um, so you've looked at, for your career, you've looked at pushing D&D and just role playing games in different directions. So looking ahead from where we are now with role playing games as an art form, are you hopeful or are you concerned?
Um, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. I think there are a few things. There are a couple of specific things. Um, One, and this came up. I don't remember whether I said this on one of these shows, but in recent weeks, my game group. or in the last few months, my game group has played a couple of uh, more independent games that uh, that are it seems to me that right now the word tabletop role playing covers two or three different kinds of gameplay that in any other situation they would be different kinds of games. But right
Right.
there, if you say I'm playing a role playing game, you could mean D&D, or you could mean a complete theater of the mind, or you could mean a LARP, right? Um, and I think
Oh,
we
and even
want to.
board games now, like Unfathomable, that has a role
Right.
playing game element to it, and
Yep.
I mean all of the merger for all of this, right?
I think that uh, somehow, somewhere, it would be super helpful for the industry to find a terminology, a lexicon, so that when you say I'm playing blah, and no one gets mad, like no one says you can't use the word role playing game. We're a role playing game too, right?
Yep.
Because
Yep.
there are people that like to play all of them, and there are people that only like to play one side of it. And if you tell them, "I want you to come play a role playing game," and they're thinking of theater of the mind, uh, rules light, and they get uh, D and D,
They get fourth edition.
or they
Right.
get yeah, they get fourth edition,
I mean,
which
it's
is
a,
not a knock on it. It's just a very specific kind of game.
exactly, you know, exactly right. I mean, and that's why I mentioned it, right? That's is it a role playing game? Yes. Is it a role playing game like other editions of D&D? No.
Right.
And where it ran into those problems were it was all about expectations.
Yes. No, I if
Yeah,
you tell me
yeah,
that we're
vampire and all the rest. Yeah,
playing D&D and it's 4th edition, honestly, I'm going to be a little disappointed. That's not what I'm coming to the game to do.
right,
But I played in a 4th edition campaign I loved. I just got myself into that headspace.
right, right, right. Yeah. So yeah, coming up with that common language is,
Yeah.
even to the point where what people's jobs are. I was just on a call with the Tabletop Game Designers Association. I'm on the board for them, and we were talking about that. Is that's actually something that needs to happen in the tabletop industry, is just so everybody knows just roughly what these jobs are supposed to be, because
Yeah.
they get pulled in from different places, right? So what your job is in the computer game industry might get ported into this, and then the language doesn't match up, or film, or
Right. I mean,
fiction publishing,
I,
or the rest.
that's what happened to me. You asked, was I did I want to be a designer?
Right? Yes, yes. That what does that mean? Right, right. Okay,
But I think I love the fact that people are now not knowing nothing about it and seeing uh, the the stuff on YouTube, the actual plays, that
right.
it's no longer a what are you doing? I don't understand. To I want to do that.
Yep.
That's what really tells me that the future for role playing is bright. Somehow, I think there needs to and there will be a game that's not D&D that has that kind of appeal eh, to non-gamers already and
Right.
can I don't know that Hasbro wants this day to come. But
No, they don't.
yeah, but when the idea that role-playing game becomes something that like that stepping stone plan was, everyone understands it, and when you get to a certain age you want to do it, and even if you don't do it in your teens, you can later say, I want to do that with my friends.
I still get it now. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, yeah, that's great, and I hope that happens. I mean, it'll be good for the art form if it does, especially if it's not D&D, or there are
Yeah.
multiple types of things that they're all gateways in. And we've seen with like the superhero comic being perceived as the
Right.
only thing in comics in the US, how that's throttled the reach of the art form there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
all right.
So I mean, and I tell you, I am not even I hope I am convinced that will happen. I hope it happens in my
Soon.
lifetime.
Yeah, yeah, yep, yep, yeah, yeah, yes. As Michelle said, we can play it at the old folks' home. Uh,
Wheel me up to the table. I'm ready to go.
yep, here we go. All right. Well, I think we're hitting the 2 hour mark.
I can
So
talk.
yeah, no, no, this
All
is
right.
good. I'm glad.
Now,
Um,
well, thank you. I've had a lot of fun being on the other side of this.
Excellent. That was the plan.
All right, so I'm gonna switch my hats now and say, Jim, thank you very much for
You're
doing this.
very welcome. Thank you
If
for having me.
folks want to find you online, I understand that the best place is over on your Facebook.
Yeah,
That,
Facebook's the
yeah.
easiest place to find me. Yep.
And I highly suggest you do. You're doing, as you were saying, there's all kinds of interesting things you're involved in now, and um,
Yeah, I'm trying to do a lot of industry education stuff. So, I just did the creator keynote at the Gamma Expo
hmm,
and did things on how to work with creators and things like that. So, I'm spending a lot of time doing this. Well, we have this in common, Stan. I mean, it's the educator part too. I've taught at college a couple of times that it's trying to make things easier for creators coming along so that their visions can match, like it did for you with the Dragonlance Bestiary.
hmm.
The projects that you get into print match what you're hoping they will be.
All right, so hold on. I'll do an outro, and then you and I can do our tatas.
Cheers.
All right, there we go. That was a show with me and and Jim Lowder, who was a very very good host. I'm glad to know that uh, you know I was he. I look at that. I look at what he was doing, and I was thinking, okay, yeah, I can see. I did that. He's. It's certainly his riff, but I feel like even when well, I'm not saying I think he's doing what I did, but I'm looking at it and saying, okay, I think I did that too. I guess I did. I've done a pretty good job. And of course, all of you have been watching. Tell me that too. The fact that people are enjoying this and coming back, uh, I'm very grateful for that, and I'm happy, given the people I've been able to talk to, that we are adding something to the history, something for folks to look back on about our hobby and passion, tabletop role playing games. So we're into season two. Next week may be Rob Schwab. I think it probably will be, but I don't want to say that with it as declarative a statement because anything could go wrong. But come back if it's not him, it'll be someone interesting, and I'll be there for sure. Till then, everyone, please give a thumbs up or a heart or whatever it is on the platform you're watching. If you're watching this on replay, it would help me out a lot if you could just leave a comment. Just if I say something, if I said something you found interesting, or just like, good job, Stan, keep it up. And that's not because it makes me feel good, though it does. It's because that is what's helping to get the show shown to new people. The more we have little interactions like that with the episodes, the more the platforms show this to people who haven't seen it yet. So if you want to help this show get around, A, tell your friends about it, make a little post in your social media, but B, just clicking that like and leaving a comment is actually a huge help in making that happen. So please, if you get a chance, do me a solid. Just just say hi. I will see you all next week. I'll be back tomorrow with another episode of my Random Encounters improv cartooning show. And if you're a fan of sumo wrestling, my show, The Sumo Show, which is on another channel, is going to be on Friday evening. So it's going to be plenty of me on the internet. Right now, I'm going to go have some dinner.